Hi, everybody, and welcome back to Nick Talks. This episode's amazing guest is a musician, former member of Mumford Sons, the band who have won Grammys and Brit Awards, and a little bit like me, is that he was so much more famous than me, was cancelled because, like me, he thought he had free speech, he thought he lived in a free country, and he thought he could have a civil conversation with people online, and he found out the hard way that's very difficult these days. So first of all, welcome Winston Marshall to the show.
Nick, thank you so much for having me on your podcast.
No, thank you very much for coming along. Let me self-declare first, I'm not a huge music fan. I only heard of Mumford and Sons when you got cancelled. But then when I've listened to some of the music, it was like, oh, I've heard that on the radio, or I've heard that on the radio. And I think for Mumford and Sons, the sound of them to me is the banjo. And can you just tell me, who was that person playing that banjo?
It was me, Nick. I was the banjo player, and I was the banjo player at Mumford Sons for 14 years. I played other string instruments like guitar and mandolin and dobro and electric guitar and heavily auto-tuned vocals. And I should also note, by the way, that the banjo is like an easy version of the guitar. So if any guitarists listening struggling to get a job, I highly recommend switching over to the banjo. And also, there's a lot less job competition, so much easier to keep your job once you've got it. Although, as I learned, keep your job so long as you don't think for yourself or start reading any books, because that will get you in all sorts of trouble.
Keep your job if you keep your mouth shut.
Quite. Well, you joke, but actually, it has been it was not only my personal experience, as that happened to be literally true. Literally is an interesting word there, but also since having left the band under the circumstances in which I left the band, and for listeners who don't know, I had tweeted about a book.
We'll get into that in a minute. Yeah.
Well, this is why I was focusing on the word literary there, because since that has happened, many musicians have come to me expressing, and not just musicians, across the creative industries and actually across society more broadly, self-censorship at work, in the workplace, or in various parts of society. And I think it has been a serious issue over the past few years for various reasons. And it's very worrying. And in the music industry, you see this pretty regularly. I mean, I just wrote a piece about MIA, who's a British Sri Lankan artist, and she had her offer to play a London music festival, Field Day Festival, rescinded last month because of, quote, her online opinions. I dug into her online opinions, and it seems to be that she is critical of the vaccines. There was up north near you, there was, this is kind of goes back to the BLM and George Floyd killing, that the head of LIPA, guy called Mark Featherstone Whitty, wrote, representing LIPA, the music university set up by Sir Paul McCartney, wrote at the time of the Black Square on social media, that movement, he wrote, "We stand in solidarity with all people fighting racism, all lives matter," or something like "every life matters," something like that. So even though he was and then he had to issue an apology because that was offensive. So he literally wrote, "I stand with all people fighting racism, all lives matter, or every life matters," and had to apologize for that. And so, I mean, I can go on. There's what's happened to J.K. Rowling. In music, there's I think coming to mind off the top of my head, there's Craig Potter's the keyboard player for Elbow, who had to swipe all his social media because he came out in defense of J.K. Rowling. James Dreyfus, the actor you'll remember from Gimme Gimme Gimme, who's also been on my podcast, and on my podcast indeed explains how he's lost work because of his gender critical opinions. You have this guy, various stuff on the vaccines, that a lot of people lost work because they were, the drummer of The Offspring got kicked out of the band because he wouldn't take the vaccine because he had underlying conditions. The singer of UB40, Matt Hoy, was kicked out of the band because he couldn't take the vaccine, not because they were against vaccines, but because they couldn't take the vaccine.
It's definitely got to a stage where there is only one view on any topic that's allowed. And if you don't, and whatever that view is can change day by day actually, but there's only one view. And if you don't have that view, that is an admission of your guilt, of your lack of character, of your inability to fight light over darkness, because there's something wrong with you. You're obviously evil. There's obviously something Nazi-like, and that seems to be where we've got in society, where we don't want to hear a view that we disagree with. The person there has to be something wrong with that person to have that view in the first place.
Well, I definitely agree, and it's the goody baddie fallacy. It's the idea that that we're not all the Christian idea that we're all fallen and fallible is completely forgotten. Actually, we're divided into goodies and baddies, like it's some sort of Disney film. Although I would say a Disney film has a better understanding of human nuance than the current climate. But I would like to add that I don't think this is necessarily people seem to divide things into a right and left, or it's more complicated than that, particularly it certainly doesn't divide easily along economically right and left lines, but let's say there's a cultural conservative and a cultural progressive. But I think it's a mistake to assume, as many people do, that it's the cultural left that is silencing the cultural right. And I'll give you a famous example. It's Trevor Sinclair, who's a football player, used to play for Queen's Park Rangers in England. And I think at the time, and he's a commentator on TalkSport, and at the time of the Queen's passing, he wrote on Twitter something heavily critical of the monarchy, calling it a racist institution, and perhaps using callous words. And I would say I personally disagreed with it, but TalkSport suspended him for that. So what's crucial here isn't just that people are dividing each other into goodies and baddies, which is a problem, because that's happening within families, right? So that's a serious issue. In America, Thanksgiving is like dying as a family holiday because families can't get on with each other anymore. But it's not just that, it's that there are professional repercussions, not for saying or doing actually bad things, but rather for expressing opinions that the other people don't agree with. And that is what I think is the really dangerous, insidious nature of cancel culture. And I do think it's a real thing. It's the repercussions just for wrongthink.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So there's a lot there we will get into. Just for people who may not know your story and why I've invited you on the podcast today, let's go back to a year after I was cancelled. I was cancelled in June 2020. Let's fast forward 11 months from that.
Will you remind me your great crime?
Yep, sure. So it was the beginning of lockdown. George Floyd had just been killed or just died on the streets in America. And we had a mostly peaceful, violent protest in London where 24 police officers were injured. And I thought, who is this Black Lives Matter? So I did a bit of research online, which basically meant I went to their website and read their website. And then I wrote a 700-word blog on what I discovered on their website because I didn't like what they were saying. And the main bit I didn't like was, let's disrupt the Western nuclear family. And after I spent 10 minutes thinking about that line, because I didn't understand what they meant to begin with, and I came to the conclusion, what it means is less fathers in the home. The nuclear family is a mother and a father. These people aren't trying to get rid of mothers. They must be getting rid of fathers, and that's our biggest problem in society, is a lack of fathers in the home and involved in their children's lives. So I wrote a blog saying they're a neo-Marxist organisation. I also started off by saying, of course, Black Lives Matter. And we need to stop separating into groups: black, white, gay, straight, Christian, Muslim, man, woman, and we need to come together. We need to solve our problems together. Some people online read that and went, Nick's obviously a Nazi. So they set up a petition to have me fired. That got 450 signatures. They then bombarded the board of the charity I founded, I set up. I appointed the board 3 of them were personal friends. They bombarded the board with threats, and the board, in a 1-line email, sent me an email going, "He's sacked."
Wow.
And then my life fell apart for a week, and then I decided, I'm not having this. I need to save my reputation if I'm going to do something new after this. So I fought back, and within a couple of weeks, I'd forced the whole board to resign in disgrace. And then I got my job back, got the charity back, and yeah, it was. Once I threatened them with legal action, once I said, I'm coming after you personally, and you all own your own house, and I'm coming after your houses, within 18 hours, they all resigned. That's how much they cared about the charity. That's how much they cared about Black Lives Mattering. Was once it affected them personally, they all went, I'm out of here. I'm not having any of this. And they all resigned in disgrace.
Wow. Well, on the issue of Black Lives Matter, I was the same as you, and that it doesn't take much research into the organization to see it's a bad idea. In fact, I'd actually been, before the George Floyd murder, I had been living in America for a few years, and before COVID, and I was very well acquainted with the Black Lives Matter literature, work of Patrisse Cullors, for example, and all of that stuff. And you say it was neo-Marxist. No, it was explicitly Marxist, not and the evil ideology of humankind. And by that, what I mean is that it's the ideology that's killed the most amount of people. As far as an ideology obviously can't, but an ideology that inspired the killing of the most amount of people. Let's put it that way. It's more articulate. The BLM organization, as you said on the website, anti-nuclear family, so i.e. anti-family, which is Marxist as well as neo-Marxist, anti-capitalist, basically the functioning of society. And actually they've now changed their website, but I'm sure you could dig up what was said before. Now, so what you went through, that society was, in that summer 2021, we were completely obsessed and transfixed, and we went bananas, and that's partly to do with the fact that we'd been locked up in the lockdowns and COVID, and it doesn't already now, a couple of years on, we can look back and say, wow, things really got out of hand there. And in the music industry, after the George Floyd killing, there was what was essentially a picket line erected where you had to put up a black square. If you didn't put up a black square, it would be seen as opposition. This is the time of silence is violence. And there were plenty of examples of artists apologizing for not putting up a black square, or a band called Hanson apologized because they put it up a day late. I already have mentioned the Mark Featherstone Whitty example, and how that ties into my story is that a little bit after that, so the beginning of 2021, I tweeted about, I've been tweeting about all the books I'd read. I tweeted about a book called Unmasked by an American conservative journalist called Andy No, which documented the far left extremism in the United States, contemporary far left extremism in the United States extensively, and the BLM riots, as you say, the mostly peaceful riots, in which 19 people in the first 14 days were killed in the United States, in which hundreds, if not thousands, of businesses were destroyed, many of which, perhaps even most of which, were Black businesses. And so an industry, or a society even, that purported to care so much about Black lives, when it was Black lives that were suffering the most from, or suffering a lot from, those riots, you could not criticize them. And so anyway, part of the reason I think I tweeted that book, sort of the fact I was tweeting about all the books I was reading, was, and why I took such interest in that, is that I felt that the conversation was not including that, because I think it's absolutely crucial that we have conversations about racism, about those sort of societal injustices, and we should have those. I'm happy to have that conversation any time of the day. But at the same time, we've also got to look at the downsides of that. And I hope now, with a little bit of calmness, with time, we can look back and go, actually, it went too far. I think it's pretty damn obvious it went too far if that many people were killed from it. And the same thing, I don't know that anyone was killed in Britain in the BLM riots, but certainly they were violent riots. You've already stated how many police officers were injured in them. I remember seeing them. I got quite emotional when I saw them destroy the cenotaph, because many people in my family had fought in the wars for our freedoms, and in a way that, for me, the cenotaph represented the hard lives that they had lived for us all to live. Not only to mention as the other side of my family were escaped Nazism and were Holocaust survivors. So for me, it was like that cenotaph. I got quite emotional when I saw that being destroyed. But again, so for me, it personally, that isn't just a stone on Whitehall. It actually represents something else. But I guess whatever. It's a small point to make.
So let's get to, you sent that tweet out about Andy No's book, right? Andy No's fantastic. I like Andy No. He's the bravest journalist, I think, in the world today, Andy No. You sent that tweet out. You went to bed probably. What happened after that?
Andy No is certainly very brave and has been attacked several times by these far-left extremists, including gaining himself a brain hemorrhage on one occasion. So I went to bed, and I'm not sure. Yeah, but it was late. I can't remember the timing exactly. I have it all recorded in my journals. But by the end of, maybe it was within 24 hours, or by the end of the weekend, it had blown up. It went up all the trending lists, and not only in the UK but in the US. The kind of online activists who go, oh, if you're anti-Antifa, you must be pro-far. Antifa being the name of these different small cells, mainly in America. Antifa's got a long history, and it's a different thing at different stages in the history. Antifa in 1930s Nazi Germany is very different to Antifa in 1970s Italy. It's very different to Antifa on the streets of London against Mosley. It's very different to Antifa today. It's not it's not one organization through time, and in America at the moment, it's not one organization. It's lots of small cells scattered around the country, causing havoc, including, as I've already mentioned something, but in Portland, Oregon, where Andy knows from, sieging the federal courthouse for I think it was the entire month of July 2020. Anyway, you can see all that footage online if you dig for it. So this thing blew up, and these online Antifa or far left, I sort of see them all as sons and daughters of Cain, just angry at the world and wanting sadistically to destroy everything they can, but probably because they're angry at God, or angry at something that's happened in their lives, or angry in the injustice of life or the suffering of life, all things which are real and worth being angry about. Or, well, I wouldn't say being angry at God is worth, but certainly suffering is something worth being angry about. Anyway, sorry, I digress. It blew up, and they came after all those people around me. And initially I kind of was like, I ignored it. It's just Twitter, it'll pass. But then I started getting all these phone calls, and everyone in my life, or the people I was working with specifically, were very upset. And I was open to maybe not knowing everything about the topic. So partially to protect my bandmates, partially because I was open to being wrong on the issue, and partially because I was under significant duress. that I wanted to keep my job, I issued an apology, and the apology seemed to somewhat kill it. Although then another sort of swarm, the anti-woke mob, you might want to call them, came after me for that. But anyway, over the coming months, that apology hung around my neck like a tablet of shame, because the more I dug into it, the more I realized I'd been right. The book was important. That's what I said. The author, Andy No, was brave. In fact, he was attacked again, and video footage of him being attacked in a hotel in Portland came out. And I stopped eating properly, wasn't sleeping well. And it occurred to me that this apology that I issued is going to affect me. I was already affecting my conscience, but the duty of an artist is to pursue the truth. If I had apologized when I clearly not doing something wrong, it would detract from all the work I would do in the future. It would detract from any song I wrote, any prose I wrote. Be like, well, this guy doesn't really pursue the truth. Look, he did this to save his career. He cares more about money. So it really that really bothered me. And there was another part, was that I felt like I was, Biden at the time said Antifa was just an idea. We saw of these evils that were being committed in its name, and the other far left extremists. And I thought, I'm a part of this bloody problem, because I'm the one who's sort of, by apologizing, I'm sort of denying either that they exist, or that perhaps it's even a force for good, which I don't agree with at all. So eventually I came to the conclusion that the only way forward was for me to leave the band. I explained my predicament to my bandmates. There was no real objection, and so I left the band, and life has taken me on quite a journey since then. This is well over 18 months ago now, and it was very difficult at the beginning, because I sort of always imagined I'd be playing. I love that band. I'd worked very hard from being a teenager.
Can I ask a question about the band before we move on from the band? Because there's 4 of you in the band, I believe, is it?
Yeah.
Yeah. I really understand about you trying to protect them. I get that. When you said you were leaving, did they try to talk you into not leaving?
No. There was no real objection to me leaving. And look, it's a little bit sad how it ended, but it is what it is, and life goes on. And yeah, I guess. Look, I'm very proud of the music we made. We made 4 albums that I remain very proud of, a bunch of EPs. We toured. I can't complain. Like, I had every schoolboy's dream. Like, schoolboys want to be astronauts or football players or rock stars, and I got to do that. I'm grateful to God for that. And now.
And then life happens, which you can't control. Life happens, and you are where you are now, and there's no point. I never have regrets, because regrets don't give you anything new. Regrets is just a way of internal moaning. That's how I see regrets. There should always be learning from things that happen in life, so you don't do things again that weren't quite productive the first time round. But I never have regrets, and it sounds like you don't have any regrets.
I don't think it's a useful useful thing to dwell on. Somewhere in the scripture it says, "Whoever gained an hour by worrying a minute," or something like that. Anyway, but I don't have regrets. I'm just trying to make the most. I make the most of every opportunity that comes my way, and I work as hard as I possibly can on everything that comes my way. And I try to be flexible. I don't know what direction that's taking me in at the moment. what that's meant is that I have a podcast, The Spectator, exploring taboo topics, and I do think, given, and I hinted at this earlier in the conversation, given the state of self-censorship in society, I do think it's the responsibility of those people who are ahead or above the parapet to actually have the difficult conversations for other people. In fact, I remember when, whilst I was still in the band, feeling like, oh, I couldn't talk on certain issues, very grateful that I could listen to the Joe Rogan podcast, or I could, read this stuff. I was a lot of the commentary came after me who said, "Oh, you should never have apologized." Part of me thought, you don't bloody know what it's like, because you guys, your professions, you do well when you speak on taboo topics, which is a good thing. But so most of us, we can't speak. So don't criticize us for not speaking, because you don't know what it's like to have to give up your entire professional career because you have the wrong opinion.
And you never saw it coming.
Sorry?
You never saw it coming. If you're a journalist writing controversial stuff, that's always in the back of your mind. This could be the post. So therefore, you're always self-editing and looking at different stuff. And when it comes, if cancellation mob comes for you, you've been thinking about it for 10, 20 years, depending how long you've been in journalism. You were in the same situation as me. You never saw it coming down the track. And all of a sudden, it smashes you in the face. You're splashing around in the ocean trying to look for something to grab onto, and you hoped the apology was going to end it. So I've got no qualms about you apologizing or not apologizing. Only you can make that decision in the moment you was in at that time, trying to save your career that you'd worked decades trying to build up.
Well, you asked me if I've got any regrets. I did. When I apologized, I was regretting well, sort of, not fully, because I did what I had to do in an incredibly difficult situation for me, but I regretted it enough that I had to take back the apology. I couldn't live by that apology. So that, if that's regret, then yes, but I did something about that. And so if you're going to regret something, one does. Yes, I did regret that apology at that time, but I don't regret it now, because I made it right. I retracted the apology, and I stand by my beliefs, and I sleep again, I eat again, and I'm feel healthy again. So anyway, sorry. Yeah.
No, so let's talk about now, today. So you've been involved in this now for nearly 2 years. I've been in this sort of situation for 3 years. We've seen the world now with through different glasses, different eyes that we did before. Do you think things are getting better or worse?
Well, that's a good question. What do you think?
I think we're going to look back in time, and I think we're going to thank Black Lives Matter, because I think all this has been going on for decades. Black Lives Matter brought it all to the fore with a huge bang. And because of that, we've started internally looking at our own views as society, as culture, and it's all beginning to unravel. And I think we owe Black Lives Matter, the organisation, a big thank you for that, because they're absolutely corrupt. They're absolutely held in contempt and disgrace now. And they did a public service.
I'm not sure I need some time to think about that, because keep in mind, this is an organization, they took $90 million of public general money from, not public money, so personal donations. I think 25 million went on Wall Street. They each bought themselves a nice, tidy portfolio of properties across the country, America. And as far as I've dug, I'm happy to prove wrong here, but they don't seem to have given anything to any black charities or anti-racism charities. It seems to be more trans charities. What that's got to do with racism, I'm yet to work out. But so I'm not quite at a point where I would thank them. Another thing is that the climate seems to be quite different here in Britain to America, and there I was just there on a trip, and it feels really divided. I don't think people see clearly yet. Even the BLM's misspending of money it doesn't seem, that seems like still quite taboo in certain circles. So whether we'll, I'm not sure I'll ever be grateful to BLM. I think they've corrupted a lot of people's minds, and they corrupt.
If we just look at the UK, do you think the UK is in a better position now than it was 2 years ago, socially, culturally? Because I think the point I'm trying to make is, yeah, society hasn't got any better, but we've now started to open our eyes. The trans issue now is being examined. Sending male rapists into women's prisons. We've got people protesting drag story hour. We've got people saying our immigration policy is wrong. We've got people looking at the woke nonsense and calling it out. We didn't have any of this 3 years ago. The public are beginning to wake up and demanding some common sense. That's what I mean by we're in a better position now than we were before.
Well, I think in that we can now see the folly of a lot of this progressive philosophy. Yes, you're correct. Although I would say, and there's a popular statement, I think it was on, I'm not sure, but I think this, I just watched Chris Rock's latest stand up, and I think he makes a joke about like this, I've support the woke stuff, but I think this woke stuff's gone too far type joke. And a few people have done that, like wokeism's gone too far. I would argue, having read the literature well before it went too far, it was always clear that this was a dangerous and divisive, a bad set of ideas that was going to cause a lot of harm. So I would say it didn't go too far because it was always bad. I don't see a side of, for me, there's nothing redemptive about woke culture. It's anti-liberal. It's anti-human flourishing. It's divisive. It goes against the liberal Christian values that I think are its opposite. So I
agree, and I think what they mean when they say, I have this conversation quite a lot with lots of people when they say I agree with feminism, but feminism has gone too far now, or they say I some of the woke policies are great, but it's gone too far now. What they mean is this ideology benefited me personally for a while. Now it's beginning to not to benefit me, so now I think it's gone too far. But you're right, it was always destructive. It was always the wrong policy, the wrong path to go down. But
that I don't necessarily, Nick. Where I might challenge you on that is that I would say is a bad faith description, because I think that a lot of people who believe the woke stuff, they're not thinking, oh, this is going to benefit me, and then when it stops benefiting me, I'll go against it. I think maybe there's a lot of people who didn't really read into it, look into it, and people like me in my generation, I was marinated in essentially postmodernism in my school without even knowing what it was, and this progressive or modern progressivism, without really being able to articulate what it was. It was just it's been in our schools for a long time, and in Britain and in America. So where I think maybe I would challenge you on that is that I think a lot of people didn't really read into it or look into it and just assumed it was for good. And, you see words like justice or social justice, you assume it's for good. And yes, as if justice is what it is, yeah, of course it's for that. You don't even think about it, but actually that's not what it was. So I think maybe it's perhaps where the change has been that people actually have now looked into it and gone like, oh, actually, these are not good set of ideas. Or they can see by the fruits you shall know them. You see the fruits of these ideas, then it's bloody clear, what good they are. Yeah, and maybe there are some people as well who are more selfish and thought, well, now that I'm on the other end of this.
I agree with what you said. I think we're on the same page. I just need to explain my point a bit clearer. I don't think people were saying selfishly, consciously, this stuff's good for me, so I'm going to support it. Now it's not good for me, I'm not going to support it. I'm talking about people subconsciously. This is benefiting me. That benefit might be, it makes me feel pink and fluffy. It makes me feel like a good person. So they're getting something out of it, but now they're not, or they can see how it's damaging them. Now they're not woke. Hence it comes to the phrase, this woke stuff's gone too far. Well, it hasn't gone too far. It's just now impacting you. That's why. So yeah, I don't think people are consciously got on board because they were getting something out of it consciously. It was always subconscious, a lot of it.
Sure. Yeah. I think that's true.
Yeah. Winston, this has been a fantastic conversation. I'm so happy that you've got through this. I'm happy that nearly all the way through this podcast you've been smiling, which shows to me that you're over that, and your life's moved on. It's like you're like in the same situation as me now. Your life is just taking a different turn, and you're open to new experiences, new opportunities, and you'll see where that takes you. I'm on the same journey. Let's see where this takes me now. I just know that if I could roll back 3 years and I'm sat at this same computer now and that enter button is flashing at me going, Nick, do you want to post this article? Because you know what's going to happen. I'm at a situation now where I would press that button. Roll back 18 months, 2 years, you're sat at your computer or your phone, that enter button is flashing. You know what's going to happen if you press that enter button. Would you still press that enter button?
Well, and another thing I'd add is that, you describe your charity and that the board, they've gone. Good riddance, right? Well, maybe it was very painful at the time. I'm sure it was. I bet there were some great friendships that lost there, and I won't take away from that. That's a very, very painful, difficult thing to go through. But you're clearly trying to serve your community in Manchester. You've told me about what you do. You're serving really vulnerable kids who need help more than anyone. And now you've got rid of, or the people they've been cleared who are not part of that journey, who are not, and hopefully they'll find their own things and be able to serve in different ways. And that's a great thing. It's like now that you can rebuild properly, and it was like a little earthquake, and it shook out. You shook the tree, and you got rid of the nonsense. And I feel that way in my life personally.
Would you have pressed that enter button? Knowing everything you now, would you have pressed that enter button?
When I'm on Twitter or with my articles, I still have part. Maybe this is like me being like sort of too polite or something, but I get a little bit nervous. I don't know if I've got like mild PTSD or something.
No, I get that.
It was, for me personally, and not to be like a victim or anything, but it was such a traumatic experience that I still get like nervous when I'm on Twitter and stuff. So I haven't fully found my voice yet, but I'm getting there slowly. I'm perhaps a little sensitive.
It takes time to get over this, so don't worry about it taking time. It takes time. It took me well over a year to mentally get over what happened to me. So it's just very, very traumatic. Winston, thank you again for coming on.
Nick, my pleasure. Thank you for having me. God bless you and your work. Long may it continue.
Thank you, and we'll catch up again soon.
I hope so.
Thank you.